Hello and welcome to San Francisco. Today's flight will take us from SFO, San Francisco International Airport, up to PDX, Portland International Airport. Today we'll be flying in the FlyJSim 727 V2, in particular the 727-100 model. Since this is a new plane to me, let's go ahead and take a look at it. So this is the FlyJSim 727. We can start a walk around. A really well done airplane here in X-Plane. Great exterior model. We'll see on the flight deck, really nice interior modeling as well. I really like the way it flies. I like the way the systems have been implemented. There's enough there where you can, really go through all the checklists and flip the right switches and do the right things. Not all the areas, of course, are going to be fully implemented behind the scenes like a PMDG aircraft might be. But my understanding is FlyJSim is literally just a one-man shop, so I think these aircraft that he produces are labors of love and really just impressive for what one person can do, and definitely of the caliber of aircraft that makes it easy for me to spend more time in X-Plane and less time over in Prepared. So I think the 727, obviously it's an older aircraft at this point. I don't think used in any commercial service and probably even retired from most cargo service. But really nice looking aircraft, of course, classic tri-jet design. And I think, having the engines mounted back on the tail with nice clean wings just gives it a really sleek, sort of fast jet look. So great jet. I was amused by the fact that there was an Evergreen International Airlines livery available for it. Most people probably won't have heard of Evergreen, but it was an airline based down in McMinnville, Oregon, which is south of Portland, where I live. And they did a lot of charter, cargo, and personnel transport operations for customers, including the government, including the CIA. So interesting story on that airline. They're now defunct and bankrupt, but there's a cool museum down in McMinnville still that was related to them, made by the founder, the son of the founder of the airline. And some of their old 747s are actually part of that museum, along with just a ton of other interesting assets. So I thought I'd fly this fictional Evergreen flight because why not? So that's the outside. Let's go ahead and get this show on the road. I will see you in a minute in the flight deck. All right, welcome aboard. First thing that probably stands out is this is indeed an older aircraft. No glass cockpit technology here. It's all steam gauges. You have 3 sets of each of the instrument gauges for the tri-jet configuration. So again, something you don't see too often on newer aircraft. But otherwise, everything as you would expect. Captain and first officer station. You can look down to the pedestal. Really nothing going on here except the comm and some nav radios. We do have an autopilot, so some basic autopilot functionality to follow headings, navigation radios, as well as a couple of pitch mode selectors. There's no GPS or FMC or any kind of flight planning capability, but we've spared no expense on this airframe and installed the venerable Delco Carousel for INS, so the inertial navigation system. This thing works with gyroscopes, and just based on the movement effects, the inertial effects on those gyroscopes, it's continuously computing the position in 3-dimensional space relative to when it was turned on and warmed up. So we won't be using that for navigation today. We'll just be using radio navigation aids. However, I am going to program some of the interesting points along our flight plan into the INS, just so we can sort of see how that works and get better situational awareness and things like ground speed and distance to our next navigation point. So that'll be interesting to see in action. We can go ahead and look up to the overhead panel. And again, it's what has eventually become a relatively typical Boeing sort of layout. We have some of the overrides for use in emergencies with hydraulic power. Otherwise, you're looking at things like anti-ice down this right side, signs, crew communication in the middle, and then really lights all along the bottom, and then the transponders up here. Just because I guess they needed somewhere to put it. What you don't see is very much in terms of electrical, fuel, hydraulics, and that's because this aircraft has a flight engineer station. So we'll pop back over there. So the flight engineer sits around back. This is a 3 crew member aircraft, and the flight engineer will be able to monitor and control electrical power, pressurization, as well as the electrical and hydraulic systems, as well as the APU back on this panel over here. So now in the sim, instead of doing the job of 2 pilots, we're going to be doing the job of 3 pilots. But unlike something like the Concorde that requires pretty constant fuel management and some other things from the flight engineer, really once we get things set up for flight, there's not much to do, so it's not a lot of overhead that we won't be able to handle. But that'll just be my preemptory excuse for if things get a little bit ahead of me. It's because I'm doing the job of 3 people, so the concessions we make for the simulator are in full force. So we're on ground power right now. The aircraft powered up on the external ground power. Other than that, we are pretty much as we would find the aircraft in the state for the first flight of the day. So we'll go ahead and go through some of the startup activities. And then, again, because we don't just have an FMC that we plug in a flight plan and it'll take us through both vertical and lateral navigation from airport A to airport B without really us having to intervene or think about it much. We are going to spend a bit more time than usual talking through the flight plan, looking at the charts, and deciding how we want to set up both our INS waypoints and then en route what we want to do with the radios. So with that, let's go ahead and start getting things set up. Let me look up at the overhead panel. We'll just do a quick flow down each column here and make sure things are where we want them. So everything's good on the left. Since it's the first flight, we'll go ahead and test the stall warning near the stick shaker, so that is working. Nothing we need to worry about here. Down the middle, we'll arm the emergency lights. And we'll go ahead and get the no smoking and seatbelt signs on. Transponder, let's say we got an ATC code of 4762. So that's set. We don't need to worry about that. Get the window heat on so the windows begin heating up. Pitot heat down here, we'll leave that off until we are ready to taxi. And the logo and navigation lights are on, which is correct for where we are at this phase of startup. We'll pop back over to the flight engineer station, do a similar check of everything. Here at the gate on ground power, we'll go ahead and turn the galley power on. That way they can heat up the coffee for some of those early passengers on board. Everything else is pretty much off, which is where it should be at this point. And we don't have any ground air connected. We don't have the APU on yet, so no air conditioning available for the passengers at the moment. So our flight plan, which we'll get to, is set to cruise at 36,000 feet, flight level 360. So we'll set up our pressurization system with a flight altitude of 360. And we're going to be landing at Portland, which is 30 feet altitude, so we'll set our landing altitude to 30. The other thing we can do in case the automatic system fails and we need to take over manual control is get ready to manually set the cabin altitude. Since we know that we're going to be cruising at 360, we can use this little scale here to go to 360 on the flight altitude, and that corresponds to a cabin altitude of 6,000 feet. So that's already set, so we'll just leave that there. And then everything else looks good for now. So pop back over to the captain's seat, make sure our parking brake is on, and let's turn our INS to standby to begin its startup procedure. So let's look at the flight plan. I have my electronic flight bag here in X-plane. So again, this is necessarily fictional because Evergreen Aviation is no longer flying. We're going to be flight EZ 504 from KSFO to KPDX. Our scheduled time of departure is 0000 hours 30 Zulu, which gives us about 20 minutes. We'll see how we do on that. Just looking through some initial information, expecting a 28 right departure from San Francisco and a 28 right arrival into Portland. Cruising at Mach 0.82, flight level 360. Alternate if we can't land at Portland due to weather minimums or something like that. We're just going to go all the way up to Seattle because our airline has ground and passenger handling equipment there, and it's not too much farther, especially if you're already at altitude. So I've just plugged in Seattle as our alternate. But weather in Portland is really clear, warm day today, so that shouldn't be a problem. We're expecting zero fuel weight, 108,500 pounds. So that's our loaded cargo, passengers, the airframe itself, and we are going to have 23,300 pounds of fuel on board. So if we fly over here to the flight engineer station, we should be able to confirm that we have, what's that, 8, 8, 8. So 8 by 3 is 24, so we have 24,000 pounds of fuel. That looks good. And our route, pretty simple today. We're going to take the Quiet 7 departure out of San Francisco to the Red Bluff VOR, and then Juliet 1 to the Rogue Valley VOR. And then from Rogue Valley, it's the Moxie 6 arrival into Portland. This next page of our flight plan just has various waypoints and time estimates. Our first officer would usually be keeping track of that and just recording along the way. And some climb and descent wind information. Nothing really we can do with it in this aircraft, but if we had an FMC, you'd program that in to improve its predictions for time and fuel. So the first thing we need to do is tell the INS where we are. Again, remember, there's no GPS. It's just all based on cumulative movement from the start position. So that's why in the books of charts that you see commercial pilots carrying around, one of the tables for every airport are the stand coordinates for the various stands, or gates as we call them in the States. So I am at gate C44 here in San Francisco, and the coordinates of that are north 37, 36.9 minutes, 122, 23.0 minutes west. So the way we enter that into our INS is we go to position. So we're going to tell it our present position. We hit north, and then 37, 36.9, hit insert, and then west, 122, 23.0, insert. So that's our present position. Waypoint 0 is always the present position, so currently it agrees waypoint 0 and our present position match. That's what we'd expect. We'll go all the way around here to status, and we'll pop this over into align mode. So alignment takes probably a good 10 to 15 minutes at least, and that's where it is adjusting itself to the gravitational field of Earth itself. So the force on the gyroscopes due to gravity, and then just making sure everything's nicely aligned. This number here is the current, essentially, navigation performance. So 9 is the worst, 0 is the best. Anything below 5 you can start using for navigation, but ideally you'd wait for this to get all the way to 0 just so you can get the best initial warm-up and precision, since you are going to accumulate errors over the course of the flight. So we'll let that number count down as we do the rest of this. So moving on from there, let's get back to a view we can use. So just some situational awareness at first. We're starting out at San Francisco. We're at gate C44, which is right here. So this is nice because we'll know for our pushback we want our tail to come to the left, point the nose to the right. and then we will taxi out down here, probably take Alpha and then Foxtrot 1 up to the runways. So the next page I have the ground overview of the airport. So again, we'll come out of taxiway C, take Alpha, Foxtrot 1 across runways 0, 1, and then Foxtrot all the way down to the end and take Charlie across to runway 28 right, which is going to be our departure runway. So we'll just keep that in mind as we taxi. We basically will just take a little turn, Foxtrot, Foxtrot, Charlie. The other thing, since I have it on this chart handy, is the San Francisco weather. It's on 135.45. So let's go ahead and just tune our comm radio to 135.45.
San Francisco INTL information echo. 0 Zulu weather. Sky conditions 800 few, visibility more than 10. Temperature 20, dew point 12. Wind 290 at 17, altimeter 2990. Arriving and departing runways 28 left, 28 right, 01 right, 01 left. Advise on initial contact you have echo.
Okay, so 2990 on the altimeters. Turn my radio off. Winds 290 at 17. So pretty much a direct, almost direct headwind into the runway at 17 knots, so pretty substantial. So that's good for takeoff performance. It'll mean probably a pretty quick ground roll before we hit V1 and rotate, but no crosswinds there to deal with, so it should be an easy takeoff. So that's the altimeter set, and just while I'm here so I don't forget, we're going to, of course normally ATC would give you an initial climb and then clear you as you get transferred from sector to sector, but since there's no ATC, just one less thing for us to worry about. I'll go ahead and directly put my outcell to flight level 360, and we'll just ascend all the way to our cruising altitude after takeoff. Okay, so back to the plan here. So we picked up the weather. That just seeing the radio frequency here triggered my thought to do that while we're here, so that's out of the way. So after we take off, let's turn this around, zoom in a little. We're flying the Quiet 7 departure. This is nice because it's entirely radio aid based, doesn't require RNAV. Again, with the INS, we can do RNAV procedures, but for this flight, I want to just focus on radio navigation while we're still kind of learning the characteristics of the INS before really depending on it for our flight. So from 28, we take off, and then we make a right turn to heading 033 to intercept radial 342 from the San Francisco VOR. So then we fly 342 until we hit this sauna point. So that's going to be 75 miles away from the field. And then from sauna, we turn to intercept the 168 radial to the Red Bluff VOR. So then if you remember our flight plan, we go Quiet 7 to Red Bluff, so that gets us to Red Bluff, and then Juliet 1 to the Rogue Valley VOR. So here's a little picture of the en route chart, the segment from Red Bluff, and then Juliet 1 is just a direct shot to our next flight plan point, Rogue Valley. So that's convenient because there won't be a lot of, if you're following, Juliet 1 or any of these jetways for a long time, you're usually hopping from VOR to VOR, having to make adjustments. But this is a relatively short flight, just from San Francisco up to Portland. Really the only segment between our departure and arrival is this one segment of Juliet 1. So that's convenient. We'll get to Red Bluff, and then once we get to Red Bluff, we follow radial 330 And then eventually we'll change over to going to radial 149 on Rogue Valley. When we arrive at Rogue Valley, we begin the Moxie 6 arrival into Portland. So here's the airport up here. And we can see that we have an OED transition for Moxie 6. So coming from that Rogue Valley VOR, we'll continue following radial, let's see, this 345. We're now working on radials of, that'll be Rogue Valley. So 345 off of Rogue Valley to this Moxie point. And then from Moxie, we follow radial 343 to the Battleground VOR, which is up north of Portland International. So flying along Moxie again, it's just going to be a straight shot until we hit this O City point, 17 miles from Battleground. Then at O City, we'll turn on a heading of 100, since we're going to be landing to the west. And again, at this point, air traffic control would provide vectors to vector you around onto your approach procedure. Since we don't have air traffic control, we'll just have to self-vector. So let's go ahead and look at the ILS 28 right procedure here. So when we get to Portland, remember we're going to be coming in, kind of following my mouse pointer, turning heading of 100, so we're flying that way. At some point we'll want to turn ourselves around such that we end up intercepting this Nacy point. We'll use that as our initial approach fix for the ILS landing. So we just want to keep that in mind. We'll go to Nacy, should intercept that at 3,700 feet, and then we start riding the glide slope down. I guess technically at distance 13. But we'll just go ahead and if we intercept Nacy at 3,700, we'll take the glide slope whenever our instruments pick it up. And then it's down on into Portland. And then I have some charts once we're on the ground in Portland. We can look at parking positions and coordinates if we want to, all of that. But we don't need that right now. So let's go back to the beginning and think about how we want to do this. Let's get back to our departure. So for our departure, we're going to turn on a heading, and then we're going to follow a radial. So I think the first point I want to put in the INS is the Sauna point, because that's the point that indicates when we make the slight turn over onto the Red Bluff radial instead of the San Francisco VOR. So let's go ahead and start doing this. We can come around to Waypoint. And I can zoom in a little bit on our INS unit here. So the first waypoint, waypoint 1, will be Sauna. So just like the present position, I type in north 38521, insert, and then west 122241, insert. Once we get to Sauna, we're going to Red Bluff. So waypoint 2, I'll enter the coordinates for the Red Bluff VOR. North 40 degrees, 5.9 minutes. West 122142. And then our flight plan is Red Bluff, Juliet 1 to OED. So since that's a straight shot, I'll just enter my next waypoint as the OED VOR. So waypoint 3 is going to be north 42.28.8, west 122.54.8. Then from Rogue Valley, it's on to the Moxie 6 arrival. So from OED, it looks like the next point that might be interesting is Moxie. So I'll go ahead and set waypoint 4 to be north 44.090. and west 122, 45.2. So looking along the Moxie arrival, one point stands out here. This Vance point is where we are going to expect an altitude crossing instruction from ATC. So we're a jet, so it'll be 12,000 feet. So for the purposes of descent planning, we might want to be able to look at how far we are from that point. So I'm going to go ahead and enter waypoint 5 as this Vance point. So Vance is at north 44,580. West 122, 40.3. So after Vance, we're going to want to turn at O City, so let's enter O City as a waypoint. That's north 45, 27.9, and west 122, 37.2. So then we're going to turn heading 100 and get radar vectors to the approach. Again, we don't have ATC, so we're not really going to get radar vectors, but it might be handy just for situational awareness to see where this NACI point is. So I'm going to put waypoint 7. They don't give you the coordinates here, but I looked it up, and let's see, NACI is north 45, 29.0, and west 122, and I believe that's 18.7. And then from there, it's the ILS on down to the runway. So I think that'll do it for navigation points. Zoom back out. So I can, at this point, the first officer or another crew member would verify that everything is entered correctly. Obviously, this could be an error-prone procedure if you mistype a digit or miss a waypoint from your list of waypoints you want to input. We're using it as a sort of backup aid to our radio nav, so I'm not going to bore you with actually going through and verifying everything again, but in the real world, you would certainly want to make sure that the information entered there is accurate. The other interesting thing is you only get 9 waypoints, so if you have a longer flight, more than 9 waypoints, what you do is basically waypoint 9 then wraps around back to 1. So after you fly the first 7 or 8 waypoints, when you have a minute in the cruise, you would go back and actually overwrite your older waypoints leading up to waypoint 9 by the time you're actually flying to waypoint 9, and then that will cycle around and fly you from 9 to 1, and then back through that next set of waypoints that you loaded. So definitely older technology, not quite as nice as what we're used to with FMCs, but certainly gets the job done, and served its purpose very well on the original 747s. The Concorde used the system right up to its retirement. Pretty much every major airliner that had something more than just radio navigation was probably flying with one of these Delco INSs. Okay, I promise we're almost ready. So let's go back to page 5 here. Actually, probably closer to 7. So let's now worry about the radio aids. So for departure, we know that we're going to need to first have the San Francisco VOR tuned. So let's go ahead and tune that now. That's 115.8. Put it over here on the first officer side, 115.8. And then after San Francisco, so we're flying 75 out. So that looks good. So after we hit the sauna point, we're going to change over to Red Bluff. So let's go ahead and get the alternate set to Red Bluff. So then it'll just be a flick of a switch to switch over to our next VOR. Okay, 1157, 1157. And then once we're on Red Bluff, that's when we'll then tune the Rogue Valley VOR. So the last thing we need the charts for right now is, while we're here, we can go ahead and set our initial heading to runway heading, just to verify then at takeoff. So 28 right is heading 284. So I'll just dial that in. That would be about there, maybe. We'll line that up again on the runway, but it'll also be a sanity check once we're on the runway that our navigation instruments are correct. And then we'll leave our charts on our departure page here, and we want to be ready to intercept radial 342. So let's dial that to 342. Okay. So if we wind this around to status, this is a bug I've noticed in the INS. The status should have a number here. I don't know. All the other pages do. But in any case, I don't know if you noticed last time we were on status, this was counting down. So I'm going to... It's probably on 0 by now, because that actually took quite a while longer than I was planning on it taking. We're actually now going to be somewhat late for our departure. But if I click this button in FlyJSim, it actually will make sure that it's aligned all the way. So in real life, this light should have lit up to tell us it's ready for nav, but that's okay. We'll just go to the nav mode. So now I can look at the waypoint, present position. So you can already see, let me go 0 here. Okay, so waypoint 0 is always our present position. So you can see now that we're running on its own calculation navigation, there's already a slight discrepancy between where it thinks we are, which is the position tab here, and what we had put in as the initial present position. But that's to be expected. That's the nature of this INS technology. So I'm going to leave it on the distance time setting. This gives me distance to the next waypoint on the left, and then time. Once we're in the air and moving, it will calculate the time based on our speed. So I know we have 75 nautical miles to go to that first waypoint, which was that sauna point up toward the top of the Quiet 7 departure. All right, let's recenter our view here. With that, let's say the passengers are on board. The one thing I'm going to get going here, let's go to the flight engineer station, is get the APU powered up. So you see exhaust gas temperature starting to rise. And once the APU is online, we'll be ready to push back and start the engines. So we'll see the APU EGT go up, and then we'll expect it to settle back down. That'll be our indication that the APU is ready to go. In preparation for switching power over to the APU, we really want to minimize the load on it, not put anything on it that isn't necessary. So we're going to go ahead and turn the galley power off. If we did have anything else that we had turned on for some reason, we'd go ahead and turn most of those systems off again. So the temperature's down there. We can actually verify if we flip this to APU that we are indeed getting about 115 volts, 400 hertz from the APU. So I can close the field breaker and then close the APU generator breaker. That kicks external power off, and we are now running on APU power. So let's go ahead and tell the ground crew that we're ready for pushback. They'll disconnect ground power, turn on the bleed air. Doors closed or disconnected. We can go ahead and flip the pressurization system to flight mode. You can see the outflow valve now closing. We need fuel pumps on to start the engines. Let's see, based on our current fuel configuration, which is equal in all tanks, left and right valves closed, and you leave the engine 2 valve open. And again, to minimize the load on the APU, we'll just turn on one fuel pump per tank, per engine. So I'm just going to turn the aft boost pump on, one for each engine. So with that, we are ready for pushback and start. Let's go back to the pilot's seat here. And take a look down. So the way pushback works on this, let me turn my parking brake off. And then up on the overhead panel, and call the ground crew. And if we look outside, let me flip over to an exterior view. And can I go up? Yeah. So if I turn on the Show Ghost, this is a neat feature of the FlyJSim 727. It'll show me where my aircraft will end up with my current settings. So this is nice because then I can get an actual sort of realistic, where they might push me. I'll just have them line me up straight with the exit out of the alleyway here. And if I hit auto, the pushback begins. It's done with that, hop back inside. And the way we start the engines, we just take a look up and put the engine switch for engine 1 to start. What we're looking for is 20% in 2, at which point we should see some movement of N1, which we already do. Flight engineer is monitoring a rise in oil pressure, and the start valve opened. He'll yell out if something is wrong, and you introduce fuel, and then you can see the engine starting up. I'm going to hop outside again. Oh, X-Plane doesn't really worry about conflict resolution there, just because I like the sounds of this aircraft quite a bit. See the nice exhaust plume there. So, great sound set. Back on the flight deck, one thing I should do is turn my beacon on when I'm going to start the engines, so I'll do that a little bit late. You can see engine 1 started, stabilized, so we'll just repeat the procedure with engine 2. And this time I'll show you over on the flight engineer panel. You can see the start valve is open, and you can see that oil pressure is rising. So the flight engineer would call out that the oil pressure is rising, the start valve is open, and that's our cue as the captain that when we see 20% in 2 here, and we've observed in 1, we can go ahead and introduce fuel. So that'll be engine 2 starting up. I don't know if you heard that click, but that's the start valve closing. So it's up here, the start valve light is now off for engine 2. Pushback is stopped, so we can put the parking brake back on. And that looks like a good start for 2. Last but not least, start engine 3. There's 20, N1's alive. Let's go outside. Really nicely done. Okay, that's 3 engines started. Close that guard. Alright, taxi, go ahead and turn the taxi lights on. San Francisco probably uses ground surveillance radar. We'll go ahead and get the transponder on. Pointing away from the terminal now, we can get the weather radar on. That'll take a minute to warm up. Let's look at the flight engineer station. Anything that we need to do post-startup. So after startup, we don't need the APU bleeds, and we don't fly with engine 2 bleeds on when engines 1 and 3 are working. So we'll go ahead and turn off engine 2 and APU bleeds. Pressures will freak out a bit as everything equalizes between engines 1 and 3. I'll go ahead and go on to the engine generators now. Take the electrical load off the APU. Galley power can go on now that we're on the engines. Packs can go on, get some cool air to the passengers. The rest of the fuel boost pumps can come on. If I can hit the quick spots. Electrical hydraulic pumps can come on. The engine pumps are already on now the engines are started. So there we get our low pressure lights extinguished. And now we can turn off the APU. Hear that spool down. Alright, so the flight engineer panel is pretty much set for takeoff. The one thing we will do right before takeoff is set the auto pack trip over to normal. This is a system in the 727 that allows us to take off with the packs on, but if there's a loss of thrust during takeoff, it will automatically turn the packs off just to preserve as much remaining thrust from the remaining engines as possible. So since we're going to be increasing and decreasing thrust during taxi, we don't want the APUs to kick off just when we're taxiing around. So you wait before right before takeoff for that. Back up front here. The other thing I'll do before I start moving is control surface checks. So we have an indicator for rudder and elevators here. So if I go elevator, full up, neutral, full down, neutral, and then rudder, full right, neutral, full left, neutral, and then I'll just check the ailerons based on free movement of the yoke, which looks good. We're going to flaps 15 takeoff, so flaps down to 15. One of the neat features of the FlyJSim 727 is based on your current weight and conditions, it will give you the V-speeds and flap retraction schedule. And I'm going to do a flaps 15 takeoff, so you just click there, and it gives me the numbers for flaps 15. This little card, actually, if you look in the real 727 operations manual, there's a little template for this card that looks just like this. So based on the performance tables and everything, the flight engineer or somebody in the crew would have calculated all of this based on the conditions. So it gives us our takeoff EPR, which is the pressure ratio. So we're going to look to takeoff power being 2.15 EPR, which little bugs are set for. It also sets the speed bug, so it gives me a V1 bug here at 120. That's also going to be VR. And then V2, I'm going to set this inner bug to 132. And then this bug is V2 plus 10, which is going to be my initial speed target, my initial climb speed. So based on this, I can actually see the weather at San Francisco change to 29 or 89. So again, I would have had a more recent weather update, or ATC would tell me. But again, this is a sim. I have that info there. So I can just set all my altimeters to 29 or 89. Perfect. My view centered. With that, I think we are ready to taxi out and take off. Let me pause recording the video here, and I'll see you again in just a second when we begin our taxi. All right. So if you remember from our, I can actually pull it up here, our airport ground chart. So we are right here pointing what's down on this image. So we're going to go out, take a left turn onto Alpha, and then it'll be a right turn, take Foxtrot 1 across the 2 crosswind runways. And then we take Foxtrot all the way down to the end, turn onto Charlie, cross runway 28 left, and then we'll probably just hold short of 28 right to get ready for takeoff. So parking brakes off, and give it some throttle. Quick brake check, they work, always good to know. At this point, we'll mostly be on the move. Let's get the pitot heat on. One last thing to remember or forget, depending on your perspective. So our left turn. Then we're looking for Foxtrot 1. See that sign is going to be to the right here, and there's a helpful painting on the ground there. Foxtrot 1 is this sharper turn to the right. We've received runway crossing clearances from ATC. Take Foxtrot down to the end. Follow Foxtrot around to the right here. Cross 28 left. And the windsock there, you can see that substantial headwind we'll have on takeoff. We'll hold here short of 28 right. Okay, so cleared for takeoff. Let's remind ourselves, or actually before we clear for takeoff, let's remind ourselves of what we're doing. So we're going to take off, climbing right turn to a heading of 033 to intercept radial 342 of the SFO VOR, which is already tuned, and the course is already entered. And then we're just going to fly straight for a while, so we'll have some time to think. At 19.3 miles away from the VOR, we need to be above 6,000. That shouldn't be a problem. So really, it's just going to be pretty busy here as we try and both navigate and also manage our takeoff and climb. The noise abatement procedure we'll use here, we're going to use 1500 AGL as our thrust reduction altitude, which means that well, since San Francisco is nearly ground level, at 1,500 feet, we're going to pull back to 92% RPM in 1, which is going to be our climb thrust. And then at 3,000 feet will be our acceleration height. So 3,000 AGL, which again, from San Francisco, is just going to be 3,000 feet. That's where we will pitch the nose down, start accelerating, and bringing the flaps in. So we'll try to pay attention both to navigation and our climb, but we'll see how I do, given it's just me. Probably try and employ the autopilot a little bit just to help reduce the workload there. So let's close that. We'll leave our V card out because it gives us our flap retraction. And cleared for takeoff. Landing lights on, taxi lights off, strobe light on. Altimeter's already on. Cut out normal. Make sure nobody's out in the approach, since there is some AI traffic here. Yep. All right. Let's take off. Okay, takeoff power. Okay, knots. There's V1. Again, quick takeoff roll because of that headwind. Rotate. Positive rate, gear up. Trim for this speed we're on right now, which is good. Perfect. So let's get ready for our turn to 33. Set my speed bug up to there. Autopilot to AIS hold. Autopilot engaged. And heading select will turn me there's 1,500, so I'm going to throttle back to 92. Which is about there. Okay, so we're executing our turn. Autopilot should pitch us down to get back up to speed. Flight director to match what the autopilot's doing. Turn TCAS on our weather radar. That's a feature we have. Okay, so there's 3,000, so I'm going to bring us into pitch hold mode. Lower the nose about 5 degrees to accelerate. So our target speed for now. Eventually we'll go about 250. Oh, we passed our radial intercept again, trying to do multiple things at once. So as we accelerate, flaps 5, as we pass 162. Flaps 2 as we're passing 190 knots. And then flaps up as we pass 200. Let's turn on, we're going to pass it again. I should do, even though it's not going to be quite a clean intercept, it'll be better than I'm doing. We can put the autopilot in navlock, and then it'll just go ahead and acquire that radial for us, which is convenient. So we're approaching our speed of 250, so I'll put the autopilot back into IAS hold. And that should capture that speed nicely. So the flaps are up, we don't need our V-card anymore. Landing gear can go to the off position. So now it's capturing that radial for us. Speed is looking good, we're climbing. We're still at 92, that's good. So let's go ahead and flip the auto pack back to cutout. We can see the cabin is climbing, good pressurization, so pressurization looks good. Okay, it's getting us on course. Everything looks okay for the moment. So yeah, pretty busy there on takeoff, managing both the altitude and navigation with some of those quick turns. I can imagine that's one of those times it'd be nice to have a real co-pilot to keep an eye on one of those things, and then you can focus on the other. In our climb here, now that we're established, let me arm outcell. So when we eventually get up to flight level 360, the autopilot will capture that and level us out. So let's look at our chart really quick. So our first restriction was at DME 19.3. We need to be above 6,000. Well, so far we're at 12 and we're already above 10,000, so that's not a problem. And according to our INS, we have about 61 miles to go to that sauna point. And that makes sense because if we take our current 14 and subtract it from the 75, that equals just about 60, so far so good. Close that for now. Above 10,000, we can accelerate up to our climb speed. So again, I'll go pitch and pitch down. And we're going to go 280. And then once we want to continue climbing during the during the acceleration. So that's why I'm not just directly going IS hold up to the faster speed, because we might level out. So I just want to slowly accelerate to our climb speed. Okay, so that's close enough where we can have the autopilot hold us at that speed for the rest of our climb. So, 52 miles to go to sauna. Climbing nicely. Next task at 18,000 feet is when we will set our barometers to standard and turn off some of our lights. In fact, since we're already cleared above to a flight level, we can do that now. So back up to 2902. Same over here for the first officer. 2902. Leave the standby altimeter at a pressure altitude, just in case we have an unexpected descent. We'll have a rough idea, at least based on where we started from, where the ground really is as opposed to flight levels. And for the purposes of this video, let's go ahead and do our 18,000 checks now. So, lights off. Pressurization peak back here, still good. We're not killing our passengers. They appreciate that. And we're in our climb. So again, next point of interest is going to be Sana, which we're still a ways away from. So I will go ahead and see you when we get there. Okay, we're about a minute away from that Sana point. Something interesting happened. We actually went out of range of the SFO VOR. So I'm just flying a heading now to keep us on the heading that was keeping us on the VOR. So I'll talk about that in a minute, but first we know we need to flip over to Red Bluff. So I'll go ahead and flip my nav radios over to Red Bluff. And we want to fly radial 168 for Red Bluff. So let's spin this around to 168. And then when this number gets to 0, this was a nice thing of having programmed this into the INS, is even though we lost DME to the San Francisco VOR, RNS tells us when we need to make the change to intercept this next radial. So I'll do that. Put us back into Vorlock mode, and I'll go ahead and synchronize the first officer's instruments to 168. Okay, so it should turn us back here to intercept that. Oh, is it trying to go at 2? Okay, hold on. I might have messed this up. Let's go back to heading mode. And re-intercept this. I'm guessing we want the reciprocal 348, otherwise the autopilot's not going to fly us in the direction that we want to. So let's try that again. Warlock. Let's see if it captures it this time. Okay. Let's see if this intercepts. So yeah, like I mentioned, we lost the signal from the SFO VOR before the nav procedure let us do something else. I don't know if that's just a modeling problem with the VOR range in X-Plane. Very well could be. Normally if that's, you know, when they develop these procedures, they fly them quite a bit and make sure the signal is strong, and if you need to switch over to another one, they'll tell you. But regardless, that's fine. Like I said, I saw when it happened, and then I just went ahead and continued flying the heading that was maintaining us on the radial we were supposed to be on, again, knowing that we were getting close to where we needed to switch anyway. And then it was really nice having the INS to tell me when the cutover point was supposed to be. The other thing you can do if that happens, you don't have the INS going, is again continue flying that heading, then go ahead and tune to the next Red Bluff, and then on that radial that you're supposed to intercept. And remember, it's the crossing point of the 348 radial with where you already are that defines that Sana point. So that'd be another way to know that, okay, once you get aligned with the 348 radial, go ahead and make that slight turn to then stay on the 348 radial. So definitely a couple of things you can do if that were to happen. And you didn't have the INS to give you the hint of when you needed to switch. So with that, our next stop is Red Bluff. You can see the INS automatically advances the waypoint, so we're now on flying from waypoint 1, which is Sana, to waypoint 2, which which is Red Bluff. So we can go to our next chart and prepare for the next navigation. So once we get to Red Bluff is when we fly radial 330 out of Red Bluff along Juliet 1 to Rogue Valley. So to prepare for that, we can tune our standby frequency to 113.6. You know, this style of radio, you always want to make sure you're, if you're using the one that's selected, make sure you're changing the one that's not selected. So 1136, 1136, that looks good. And it looks like we're 45 miles away from Red Bluff. So I will see you again when we are post Red Bluff. I just noticed there's another aircraft off our nose below us. I wonder if I can see that. Down there, anyone see anybody? I do not. Increase our range here if we want. Alright. In any case, I will see you when something interesting is going to happen. Alright, so that tone and this light indicate that we have 1,000 feet to go to our cruising altitude, our selected altitude, which in this case is going to be our cruising altitude. So we'll just watch as we intercept our altitude. At that point, we'll accelerate up to about Mach 0.82, which will be our cruising speed. And then we'll pull back the throttles and maintain 0.82. Again, no auto throttles, so once I'm out of a vertical mode, basically when I'm just in holding an altitude, there's nothing the plane can do to speed me up or slow me down. I need to watch the airspeed and then modify the thrust accordingly. We're also almost at that Red Bluff VOR. Remember, VORs, or DME I should say, is giving you the straight line distance of your aircraft to the station. So given that we are 36,000 feet above the station, well, although there could be, I don't know if the ground is actually sea level here, but we're close to 36,000 feet above the station. We expect a reading of about 7 miles as we're passing over it. As you can see here, this is why the INS number is decreasing more quickly than the DME number here. So looking at our chart, remember when we get to Red Bluff, we just take a turn for radial 330. So we'll watch for the VOR indicator to sort of freak out. It's the technical term. Actually, before it does that, let's just go ahead and go into heading mode. And then dial up radial 330. And you see the needle shaking, that was the crossover point. So now let's go back into Navlock. Get on a heading to intercept that, and then we'll expect these lights to go green on the FMA to indicate that it is capturing that radio. So we're at 36,000 feet, which is our cruise. Our speed is coming up now that the plane has leveled itself out. Dial 330 for the first officer. And we want right about there for Mach 0.82. So there we are, we're capturing that radial, which will put us on the Juliet 1 jetway. INS is flipped over to navigate from point 2 to 3, where point 3 is the Rogue Valley VOR, OED. So there's 136 miles to go. So let's look at that. 1136. Did we already tune our standbys? Yep, 1136, 1136. So there's no crossover point called out on this segment. So what we'll do is when we're halfway between Red Bluff and Rogue Valley, we'll go ahead and switch our radio navigation over to Rogue Valley to fly into it. So that just means that we'll watch for this number, 16, which is our distance now from Red Bluff, and this number, 129, which is our distance to Rogue Valley, to be equal. And that'll be the halfway point, and then we'll just flip the radios over and start navigating to Rogue Valley. So the speed is almost where I want it to be. Let's keep an eye on that, and as necessary, I'll pull back the throttle to maintain our cruising speed. So with that, I will see you in about 123 miles when we are at the Rogue Valley VOR and ready to begin the Moxie 6 arrival into Portland. Welcome back. So we are pretty close to the OED, Rogue Valley VOR now. So let's look at our chart really quick and remember what we're doing. So when we get to OED, we want to begin the Moxie 6 arrival. So there is a Rogue Valley transition for Moxie 6. So what we do from Rogue Valley is we follow the 345 radial. So what I'm going to do is we're on a heading. Basically same as before, I'm just going to bring the autopilot back to heading hold, or heading select. And we're going to want the 345 radial. And we're basically there, so let's go ahead and go back to Navlock. And it will, we've gone green, so it has a lock, so it will intercept the 345 radial for us, which is excellent. And then we'll fly 345 to Moxie, which is another 96 nautical miles away. So when we get to Moxie, we're going to want to watch for the Battleground VOR, so let's go ahead and tune that on standby, 116.6. 116.6. For the first officer, I'm going to make Battleground active. And then that way we'll be able to see when it comes into range. And that will also give us an indication of where Moxie is, which is 96.2 DME from Battleground. So the other thing we can start thinking about is descent planning. Really, once you're in the cruise, it's never too soon to start thinking about descent planning, because you don't want to get caught by surprise and have to go down a lot steeper or faster than you were hoping for. So let's look at this. We know that really our first altitude we want to target is 12,000 feet at Vance. So from 36,000 feet to 12,000 feet is a descent of 24,000 feet. So a rule of thumb for that is to take the thousands figure, so 24, multiply by 3. That gives us, 72? So that means we need 72 nautical miles to make that descent of 24,000 feet. Now the 727 is a pretty slippery airplane, at least in this implementation of the simulator it is. So we're going to give ourselves a little bit more distance just to give ourselves a nice comfort margin. So maybe another 20 miles. So that means to reach 12,000 feet advance, we probably want to start our descent 92 miles away. Now we can determine that we're 92 miles from Vance by adding another 92 on the Battleground 47 number, but we may not have DME that far out. So this is where it's convenient to have that waypoint programmed into the INS. Remember, we programmed waypoint 5 to be Vance. So I can actually say waypoint change, present position, which is always 0, to Vance, which is 5. And it tells me we are 119 miles away. So when that gets to 92, we will begin our descent. Like I said, we can never plan this too early, because in my mind I wasn't thinking that we were actually, a few minutes away from starting our descent, but based on the fact that we're at 115 miles and we're going to start a descent at 92 miles, I'm glad we looked at this early. In the meantime, our primary DME here is going to be when we hit Moxie. So again, once we pick up Battleground, that'll give us an indication as well. So the last thing we can look at here is what speed should I descend? So we can flip this around to ground speed. We're doing a little over 500 knots ground speed. So at 500 knots ground speed, if we want to descend at about a 3-degree profile, again, rule of thumb, we can take that 500 knots divided by 2, which gives us 250. And then add a 0. I'm trying to remember this trick here. So 2,500. And then add another 250. So 2,750. So our target descent rate is going to be 2,750 feet per minute. That should give us that 3-degree path. And then that should also correspond to that rule of thumb we used to estimate that we need 72, which we added a safety margin. So 92 miles on. That's 92 miles, or 72 miles, at a 3-degree slope. So 1750 is the number to remember when it comes time to start the descent. Let's check our progress to Moxie really quick here. So we want, again, from 3 to 4. I wonder, did we already cross it? I'm guessing that means we already crossed it. So let's go ahead and turn on to radial 343. So let's go into a heading hold. Dial in 343. Yep, there we go. We picked up Battleground. Oh, actually, we still have a ways to go. Yeah, so I'm doing something wrong in the INS to get us back on the course we wanted. So ignore that. We're still flying. Nope, not 330 anymore. We're on J1. Where are we? 344. Oh, sorry. Yeah, we're already on the next procedure here. So yeah, we're flying 345. Okay, I'll just leave that set. Back to Vorlock. Just confusing myself with, for some reason the INS didn't let us set. Okay, in any case, we're at 85. We should start our descent now because we said we wanted it at 92 for the safety margin. Well, we're at 84, which is why we gave ourselves a safety margin. So let's set our target to 12. Throttle back to idle for our descent. That's going to be the 12,000 crossing clearance that we get there. Let me get this out of the way. And then, do I need to disengage outcell, or will this just start descending? Yeah, let's disengage outcell, or reselect a new altitude. And then we should be able to pitch down. And again, we're looking for 2750 on our descent, so pitch down a little too much. So probably right about, that'll probably settle out about 2750. Okay, so we are in our descent. That's holding right where I want it pretty well there. Just double checking the chart again. We should still be on this leg from OED to Moxie, which is 3 to 4, but the INS keeps auto advancing to 4 to 5. I don't know why it's doing that, but we'll be prepared for next leg, and then we'll just rely on this DME2 to tell us when we're 96.2. It doesn't do decimals, obviously, so at 96 is when we'll make the turn into the Battleground VOR. Alright, so we're close to Moxie. We're at 99, DME 96 is Moxie, so we can make sure our current heading is aligned. Go into heading select, flip the captain's nav radio over to Battleground now, which is 116.6. Set up for the 343 radial, which this time we're much closer to because we're actually at Moxie as opposed to when I thought we were before. So I can go ahead and do a Vorlock. And we have green on the FMA. So that will take us down that radial. So we're still descending nicely. Now we're back on point 4 to 5 is Moxie to Vance. So now our INS is matched up with the segment of the flight we're actually flying again. So we're here just past Moxie. We're flying toward Vance, and we want to be level at 12,000 feet at Vance. That's 11,000 to go. 11 by 3 is 33. So that'd be 33 miles to do it. We have 42 miles to do it. So we do have that bit of a safety margin there. so I'm not concerned about not hitting 11,000 there. So as we were doing those turns, our vertical speed reduced a bit, but again, because we have that little bit of safety margin, I'm not too worried about the fact that we're not up at 2750. Looks like we're descending now about 2,500, 300 knots, so I'll just leave it there. I think that'll be just fine. All right, I'll see you again in a minute. So we're crossing through 18,000 now. Normally the en route controller I'm talking to, once they clear me below flight level to an altitude, they would give me the barometer setting to use, given that I don't have air traffic control. What I'll do, I'll just tune into Portland, so 12835. 12835. Make sure my radio is back on. And we're probably out of range still. But as soon as I get the Portland weather, which hopefully is before I actually get down to 12,000, which is when it would actually matter, hopefully I'll get radio reception and we'll get the Portland barometer.
Portland INTL information.
Couldn't have planned that better.
100 Zulu weather. Sky clear, visibility more than 10. Temperature 30, dew point 12. Wind 310 at 9, altimeter 2994.
Okay, so 2994.
Departing runways 28
we'll set
right,
that now.
28 left, 03.
Somewhere behind the yoke.
Advise on initial contact.
There we go,
you have
2994. And 2994. So that's good. Winds 310 at 9, so yeah, we'll definitely still use runway 28. 28 right in our
Portland
case,
INTL
and those are favorable winds there,
drop.
so pretty much headwind.
Zulu weather.
Turn that off.
Sky.
There's a headwind as we're landing, really negligible crosswind component. So good conditions for the landing in Portland. Looking around. So at this point, we'll probably get the passengers back in their seats. We would have warned them a minute ago that that was coming up. Otherwise, we'll just continue our descent. Now we have 16 miles to Vance, and we have about 1,500 feet to go. So yeah, no problems with meeting that altitude restriction whatsoever. What I'll do here, we'll get the 1,000 to go chime. Turn off the chart for a minute. Whoops. Oh, there. That's the button to turn off the chart. So as we get to 12,000, the plane will level off. I will need to give it some throttle, some thrust. So we'll just try and bring it up a little bit to start with. Bleed off some of the speed, because the next thing, once we descend below 2,000, which we'll start doing advance, or below 10,000 by losing another 2,000, is we'll have the 250 knot speed limit. So in level flight, this 727, again, I was just the clean, really slick profile, the fact that it has 3 engines for what's really not a lot of airplane, especially with this Dash 100 model. You really need to bring the throttle back if you want to stay under the speed limit. So even now leveled off, you can see the speed isn't really dropping too quickly at all with very little thrust. So 6 miles to go to Vance. Bring the chart back up, so now you can see the speed dropping. Vance is DME 47, so yeah, that agrees perfectly with the INS and the DME. Let's keep an eye on the speed to make sure we don't drift below 250. I think once we hit 250, I'll go ahead and give it a little more gas, which should hold the speed. Well, it's doing a good job right now of not really dropping. Okay, so there's Vance. DME 47, I now switched over to our next point, which is O City, which is 30 miles. That matches up with what will be 17 miles DME. So at this point, we can descend to 4100. So I'm going to outsell 4100. We're below 250, so I'll come to idle on the throttle. Rearm outsell with the new altitude. And pitch down to start our descent. Ground speed now is 300. So about 1750 is the descent rate we're looking for, 1750 feet per minute. Again, that's 300 divided by 2. Add a 0, that's 1500. Add another 250. That's how we get our 1750. And that should put me, well, that's just putting me on a 3-degree down slope. Really only 6,000 to go. So 6, 12, 18. So we have plenty of time. Probably wouldn't actually have gone down that low that quickly. But again, since we don't have ATC here, since we're going to be self-vectoring, the less I have to think about, the better. So it's easy just to get down to altitude here, and we're safe at 4,100 feet all the way in. All right, so 10,000. We're below 250. So at this descent rate, idle thrust, looks like we're not accelerating past that. So everything looks good there. Let's turn on some lights below 10K. Really nothing more to do on the descent. Everything on the flight engineer panel is still good. Plenty of fuel left. We have, looks like, let me switch over to his seat here. Fuel quantity is still balanced, which we would expect because all the engines have been operating the same. 5,000 pounds in each of the 3 tanks, so 15,000 pounds of fuel, which is plenty. We're not going to run out of gas on the way to Portland. Descending now through 8,500. So let's look at one last peek at the charts here, and then I'll cut out this part of the video and pick up again closer to O City. So we're just descending, down to 4,100. Once I'm at 4,100, I'll level out and just try and maintain 250 knots. And then I will see you again when we are ready to make our turn at O City. Okay, we're closing in on O City here. 100 to go in our descent to 41, so that's actually timing out quite nicely. So when we get to DME 17, let's go ahead and get into our heading hold here. So there's 17, so we make our turn to a heading of 100, 100. At our altitude, so I'm going to give it a little bit of thrust so we don't fall out of the sky when the plane levels us off. Again, not much because we only need to hold about 250. So we're now going to be heading out this way on a course of 100. And again, this is the point where we would need to get vectors from ATC, but since we're our own ATC, we'll need to self-vector. So I'll wait for this turn to complete, and then let's tune the ILS. So 111.3. 111.3. Get it over here. Flip our nav radios over to that. A little below 250. I'm fine with that now because we are going to start slowing down, although not that much, so I'm going to give us a little more throttle. Okay. Our approach is 283, so we can dial that in. 283. Twice. So what we're looking for is we're flying sort of, almost parallel with the runways. And at some point we're going to need to turn around and come in to pick up Nacy. So Nacy is 14.1 miles away from the airport. And then based on our INS here, we're still moving toward Nacy. We're getting closer. So we at least want to pass Nacy. So we'll just go ahead and continue flying on this course 100. Until we're getting, close to a beam Nacy. And then when this number starts going up again, we'll turn around into Nacy. That'll just be a good estimate of when we can make this turn, which will, hopefully be before these mountains. But we're at 41. We can be flying at 37 through all of this. So let's go ahead and actually start our descent down to 37. Let's go down a little bit. At this point, I think we're probably done with the chart. Let's take a look out the window here. Okay. So there's 37. Again, I'm just watching for this number to go up a tick, which means we've passed Nacy. Okay. So now we'll turn and fly about perpendicular with the localizer. Can I put the... No, I can't put the flight director in auto approach until I actually put the autopilot in auto approach. That's a limitation of this model. So somewhere out here is the airport. Can't see out the window, but as we level out here we might see it. Way down there somewhere. Okay, so now our indication from the localizer makes sense. So we'll approach it at a bit less severe of an angle. Trying to see if I see any needle deflection yet. So now our DME is on the localizer, so we're 19 miles out. Glide slope is alive. So let me put the autopilot into approach mode. Speed, I'm going to bring the speed back. INS, we're now using waypoints that aren't defined, so ignore the INS information currently invalid. Okay, I have the field in sight. pull up our landing ref V card. VRF 119, so our target speed will be about 124. We already put the passengers in their seats. That's good. Reset my view here. Okay, 15 out. Let's go flaps 2. We're below the flap 2 speed. Yep. And flaps 5. We will be doing a flaps 30 landing, in case that wasn't obvious from the card. And we'll go flaps 15, gear down. And we'll drop our speed off. Flaps 20. Still 10 miles out. We probably could have waited a little bit, gone in a little faster, but that's okay. I'll try and keep the speed up just a little so that we're not holding up all the traffic behind us. Okay, so landing lights are already on. Let's take a look at the overhead panel here. We'll go auto brakes medium. Everything else is okay. We can arm the speed brakes for landing. Radios are set. Flight engineer station is set. Looks like we've intercepted the glide slope. So we are descending along the glide slope, as we'd expect. Let's look at the chart really quick. We can set our missed approach altitude. Climb 4,200. So 4,200 in the alt select, in case we need to go around. Okay, let's start slowing down again. Again, we're going to target 124, which is VREF plus 5. And I can go ahead and take flaps 25 and flaps 30. There's outer marker. Quick look outside at our approach. Very nice. You can see those flaps out. See the rear left wheel there of the gear. Around the nose wheel, I guess you can see. And landing lights on. Okay, so we've hit our speed we want, so I'm going to give it a little more thrust. Have the bugs set. I have the internal bugs set, so I can turn off that V card. About 1,000 feet on the altimeter. I'll give you a quick weather update.
Portland INTL information golf. 100 Zulu weather. Sky
Okay,
clear.
no change. Wind is still
Visibility more
310
than
at
10.
9.
Temp.
Need to slow down again. Seems like the autopilot's fighting a bit of a breeze going back and forth. It'll be interesting to see when we cut out what that feels like when I'm flying it. Okay, slow down a little more.
500.
there's 500. I'm going to disengage autopilot. Plane is mine. Whoa, we lost way too much speed there. I'll pick the glide slope up when I get the thrust back up. Alright, let's fly it in visually at this point. Throttle back, flare. There's the speed brakes deploy. There's nose down. Just keep us driving straight down the center line. Oh, I have thrust reversers I can put out. There's thrust reversers. And cut those out at 80. Brake here. You can make this high-speed exit. Alright, welcome to Portland. So clear the runway here. Again, since I don't have a co-pilot and flight engineer, let's just stop here really quick. Clean up. So flaps all the way up. Speed brake, I think, should have automatically come down once I started taxiing, which it did, so we can not worry about that. Landing lights off. Taxi lights on. Strobe light off. Altimeter can come off. Not altimeter, but transponder. Probes off. Window heat off. Basically just running through the after landing checklist here. And then over on the flight engineer, we'll go to ground mode. Start the APU. So that'll be ready for when we turn the engines off. Galley power off. And everything else we can worry about later. So let's go ahead and park. We can look at a Portland map here. So we came in on 28 right, exited, I'm guessing this was A6. And so we'll just come around and park at an open gate, which should be pretty close. So there's Delta 1, Echo 1, Echo 2, looks like Echo 3 is open. So we'll turn off the taxi lights so we don't blind the marshaller. Take a turn into Echo 3. Oh, not the best job taxiing in, but it'll do. Alright, swing around and call that good. With that, we can put the parking brake on. Let's go over to the flight engineer panel and again, before cutting over to the APU, we'll turn off all of the boost pumps except one. We turn the galley power off. Let's turn the packs off. Electric hydraulics can go off at this point. Bring the APU on bus. And now we can cut the engines. So engines off. Passengers out of their seats. Let them stretch their legs. Done with the auto brakes. Beacon can go off. And that's pretty much it. We have arrived in Portland. Everything there can go off. At this point, we could hook up to external power, and we could shut down the APU, then run on the ground power. But in this case, we're done for the day, so we would just shut the aircraft down. So I hope that was interesting. One thing we didn't do is turn off the weather radar. We don't want to fry the poor guy who's standing in front of us. We got to see a little bit of the INS. We got to see radio navigation. And really, overall, this is just a great plane to fly. We can hop outside here, get a good view of us at the gate. So welcome to Portland. A nice clear day here. And then one thing we can do in X-Plane, because it has the replay mode, is watch a replay of the landing. So let me get that set up. I'll be back in just a minute to close out this video with a quick landing video.